Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm Devyani Chaturvedi, Research Analyst at ISAS, and I will be your host for today's episode. The BRICS Summit was held recently in Brazil, where leaders of the BRICS countries gathered to discuss issues like multilateralism, climate change, AI governance, and the rising global trade tensions sparked by US tariff policies. The summit became even more controversial just as President Donald Trump threatened to impose an additional 10% tariff on any countries aligning themselves to the anti-American policies of the BRICS group. Since then, Brazil has been imposed with a 50% tariff. Joining me today to discuss the key takeaways from the summit is Dr Amitendu Palit, Senior Research Fellow and Research Lead for Trade and Economics here at ISAS. Welcome, Dr. Palit.
Thank you for hosting me, Devyani.
Thank you, Dr. Palit. So my first question to you is, what are the key takeaways of the BRICS Summit in Rio, especially in light of the absence of leaders like President Xi Jinping and Putin?
Devyani, I think I'll just take a step back and look at the BRICS Summit that concluded at Rio earlier this week and also the one that had taken place in Kazan last year. We know that the BRICS has been in existence for a pretty long time, and from the time Jim O'Neill came out with this connotation, the four largest emerging market economies of the world and how they will come to control the global economy in the foreseeable future. We have not really seen the BRICS doing much of decisive action over the longer part of their existence, in the sense that the BRICS have generally been shy of stepping into areas which are politically controversial. They have tried to stay confined more to subjects which are connected to global development, especially areas which are of major concern to the developing countries. And they have been successful in setting up institutions like the New Development Bank. But again, the New Development Bank has also not been that much of an institution that has been talked about because it might have been to some extent overshadowed by its more illustrious peers like the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank or even the AIIB. What we are seeing since last year is actually quite interesting. Last year was a year when the Kazan Summit came out with a couple of decisions which made the BRICS Summit quite noteworthy. And these were essentially with respect to two decisions. One was that the BRICS took a decision to set up the BRICS Pay, which would actually mean that the BRICS countries are able to trade much more easily with each other through mutually interoperable currencies, number one. And the second thing that the BRICS also decided was that they would start moving towards a system where they are likely to set up, exchanges for making sure that areas of food security and grain security between them are taken care of. So something like the Grain Bank, for example, for the BRICS. Now, last year was a time when we did not have the Trump 2.0. But since then, and before the current BRICS Summit, we have seen President Trump making quite a number of references to BRICS. So in the run-up to his election campaign, he alluded to the BRICS, but the most decisive affront on the BRICS came after his election in December, when he mentioned that if the BRICS is looking to make a move towards positioning a currency within the bloc, a currency which would, in all probability, challenge the hegemony of the American dollar, then that is something which he is not going to accept, and he would impose very heavy tariffs on the BRICS. And then subsequently, when we came to the current summit in Rio, during the middle of the summit, he came out with this view that the BRICS are proposing an anti-American agenda, and as a result of that, he would want to put 10% additional tariffs on the BRICS. I think the key takeaway from the Rio summit is the fact is that this is for the first time when the BRICS, in addition to an economic agenda, has also taken a political position. And that political position is pretty much clear from the Rio Declaration on two elements. One, without naming the United States, the BRICS has questioned practically every policy of the Trump administration. So to that extent, if questioning policies of the current Trump administration can be described as an anti-American posture, I don't think the BRICS has hesitated in being anti-American, which is a decisive shift, number one. Number two, it's not just anti-America, but insofar as taking on the unilateral trade policies are concerned, BRICS has also heavily criticized environmental policy-based trade unilateral actions in an effort to, criticize the carbon border tax kind of measures that have been proposed by the EU. I think personally this is a very important takeaway from the current BRICS summit, that firstly on the political side, it's pretty much clear that the BRICS has called out the American policies, which they firmly believe are heavily disruptive for the global trade rules and the global order. In the same breath, they have also criticized other unilateral trade actions, particularly from the EU, that are coming up across the world, making it very clear that these make life and existence extraordinarily difficult for the developing countries as such. And on the economic side, I think the BRICS has continued the efforts which they initiated last year. So the BRICS pay appears to be progressing well. And this is something which I think the BRICS will continue to stay committed to. And finally, I'd like to add, Devyani, in this context, that since the last BRICS summit, the BRICS have expanded. And I'm glad you mentioned the fact that both President Xi and President Putin were not around. Brazil and India, Brazil by virtue of being the host, and India by virtue of being the next host for the BRICS, did play a very important role. But I think it's becoming clear that it's not just the original five anymore that matter for the BRICS. There are more countries who are beginning to shape the BRICS agenda, particularly from Southeast Asia.
Thank you, Dr. Palit. I think the next few minutes we will just deconstruct what the key takeaways were and ask you to expand a little bit on it. But I think let's take it bit by bit. One of the key takeaways has been the reflected shift in the BRICS from its traditional focus from economic issues to now, to a certain degree, political posturing as well, which includes calling out the US's economic sanctions, the military strikes on Iran, and even Israel's aggression towards Gaza. So my question to you would be that what has brought this shift? And will we see the BRICS emerge as a stronger bloc when it comes to these issues in the near future?
I think I'll distinguish between two aspects, Devyani. I think this is a very important question, that what actually is, encouraging this posturing on part of the BRICS, which is now really beginning to get increasingly political. I think there are two issues in this regard. The first is that if we look at certain specific references in the declaration, firstly with respect to Israel, the attacks on Iran, I think one might be tempted to conclude that the fact that Iran is a member of the BRICS might have actually led to this decision. But let's not forget that all countries are members of the United Nations. And the UN by itself has not come out with something till now which is a direct affront to the military attacks on Iran, number one. Number two, let's also not lose sight of the fact that the BRICS has been very heavily critical of the continued hostilities in Gaza. Israel is one country which has been specifically mentioned in the declaration. And the fact that Israel has, for all practical purposes, at least in the BRICS perspective, Israel is beginning to show, or is being taken as a country which is not really perhaps that keen or that serious in putting an end to the hostilities. And the Gaza crisis is now actually, because of the persistent military dimensions, is now also shaping up to be a very major humanitarian crisis. The third point over here is that there are countries from the Middle East which have joined the BRICS. So if you look at countries like United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. If we look at even a country like Egypt, which is very closely located to the Middle East, the fact of the matter is that today the Middle East is the most volatile and turbulent region in the entire world in terms of what's going on there. So what's happening in the Middle East is beginning to squarely impact and affect a large number of BRICS members. Now, these, I think, are facts that are needed to be taken note of in the light that, to a very large extent, if you look at the other side of BRICS, which is the developed Western world, includes the G7, includes many of the advanced OECD countries, they really are not being able to improve matters in any respect, insofar as the persistence of the conflicts are concerned, and countries from that bloc are becoming major actors in the prolongation of the conflicts. So let's say, for example, when we look at a conflict like the Gaza conflict, it could not have continued unless and until Israel, which is one of the advanced OECD countries, not being supported by some of its peers, including the United States of America. Russia might be well taken as the aggressor in the Ukraine conflict in many respects, but the fact of the matter remains also that the NATO allies and the United States have had a role to play in that regard, at least insofar as prolongation of the conflict is concerned, or their lack of success in not being able to stop it. And finally, I think the icing on the cake has been the attack on Iran, where the United States got directly involved. Now, all these, I think, are beginning to send the signal to a very large number of countries in the world, which are the respective poorer, smaller countries with more vulnerable populations and regions of the world, that the advanced world is not really very particularly bothered about what conflicts mean for much of the rest of the world. Because even if you look at the newest BRICS members, a country like Indonesia has joined BRICS. We have countries from Southeast Asia who are now part of the partner country groups of BRICS, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam. The effects of these conflicts are being felt by many parts of the world in terms of rising commodity prices, disruptions in a large number of essential supplies, displacement of population, impact on climate, and there is a sense among the larger group of the developing countries of the world that the developed world is becoming increasingly apathetic to the growth of, these concerns. So as a result of that, I think there is this concern among the BRICS group that, look, it's very important to call these out and make it very clear that we are not getting any solutions from those countries which arguably claim that they are the creators and managers of the global world order. I think that is something which is pretty obvious, and I think that's where the BRICS has actually made a big call.
I think it's interesting that you talk about how different developing countries have similar agendas when it comes to the BRICS. This was actually something that I also wanted to ask you, that with the BRICS expanding its membership and partnerships, it becoming BRICS Plus, there are different countries coming together who may have different agendas. And so in that case, increasingly, we also see in international cooperations that it is becoming harder to come to more actionable items where there's likely more plurilateralism rather than multilateralism as well. In that scenario, how united would this bloc be in terms of its foreign policy alignment, especially regarding its ties with the US?
To be very honest, Devyani, I think that is where a lot of cynicism continues to exist insofar as what role the BRICS would eventually pick up. Because, we all know about the issues that exist between the BRICS members, many of this. I mean, for example, between India and China, there are historical differences which in contemporary times have become much more exacerbated. There are differences with respect to the role that Russia has in the Ukraine conflict vis-a-vis a large number of other BRICS members. There are issues probably maybe with respect to even Iran and Saudi Arabia. And I think the last point that you mentioned is very important, that when it comes to the United States, irrespective of what the Trump administration has been up to in terms of its tariff actions, making trade, very totally dependent upon security guarantees and transactional in very respects. I think different countries among the BRICS continue to view their relationships with the United States, not always in a particularly aligned manner. Having said that, there are certain areas which could act as areas of convergence. So, for example, when it comes to something like most of the BRICS countries beginning to think of whether they can shift part of their use of the dollar, the American dollar, to non-dollar currencies, including currencies which are more in vogue between themselves, then that makes a lot of sense for all these countries, because the American dollar has become an exceptionally expensive currency to use for the traders from all these countries since the last 4 to 5 years. Now, this is precisely where President Trump senses the threat. He considers BRICS to be a bloc which is capable of initiating a move towards perpetual de-dollarization. And he clearly understands and believes that the American dollar is one of the biggest sources of America's hegemony in the entire world. It's very interesting that if you look at the share of the American dollar in the invoicing of trade transactions globally, that is far, far more than the share of the United States in global trade, which basically is arising from the fact that traders across the world consider the dollar to be a safe currency to engage in. And there are systems like the SWIFT, the interbanking systems, which advance and protect that credibility. But this is something which is not easy to go away from. This is something which, even if the BRICS wishes, is really something which they cannot make come true overnight. But I sense that moves towards reducing the dependence on the American dollar has started. That is a common area of action among a lot of BRICS members, and perhaps that is irrespective of the relationship that they individually might have with the United States on the political or the strategic sides.
I think that explains the strong reaction by Donald Trump during the summit and prior to it also. I think that was one of the first things he kind of had mentioned when he had taken over. The other thing that is important to draw our attention to is that the BRICS consists of Russia and Iran both of which are heavily sanctioned states who then need to use other currencies to trade as well. So that explains to a certain degree the logical reliance on BRICS Pay, which, as you mentioned earlier, enables BRICS members to explore the use of more non-dollar currencies in their financial transactions. But I think what I would like you to sort of expand more on is that how do you think the threats imposed by Donald Trump are being perceived by BRICS members? Are they being taken seriously? To what extent? And what sort of responses can we expect in the near future on them? Because one would have expected a more calibrated joint declaration, but it seemed to be very politically active in a certain degree. So there is a certain level of resentment towards the tariff policies as well, but not as obviously as we would imagine.
I think it's very interesting that the BRICS is perhaps the only group of countries which President Trump continues to address as a bloc. Because typically, if I can describe it that way, the Trumpian way of dealing with the world is a binary way. It's a bilateral way. It's not a multilateral or a group-based way. He wants to take each country as an individual and look at how the United States behaves or stands to benefit or lose from that relationship.
Yeah, and the chart that he did kind of gives an insight into that.
But somehow the BRICS seems to have an appeal in his perspective as far as a bloc is concerned. And I think he's also a bit unsettled over the fact that the BRICS is expanding. And there's a long list of countries which are wanting to join the BRICS, including countries with whom arguably he has been able to work out deals. So, for example, Vietnam. Vietnam is reportedly a strong United States ally and a defense partner in the region. One of the important countries that the United States has always looked at in the region in its counterbalancing efforts against China. Vietnam is one of the very few countries with whom, before the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs, a deal was done by the US, yet the Vietnam wants to join the BRICS. It is not getting pulled out from there. If you look at a country like Malaysia, again, Malaysia was negotiating with the US. It continues to be very, very active in the BRICS. Indonesia, the same. And finally, India. One of the closest strategic partners of the United States, one of the earliest countries with which the US began negotiating a bilateral trade agreement well before the reciprocal tariffs were announced this time. And yet, India not only decided to go ahead, Prime Minister Modi went and joined hands, if one could describe it that way, with President Lula. And President Lula is, in the Trumpian view of things, an extremely antithetical factor because he has a personal support towards the former President Bolsonaro. So politically, President Lula is, a castaway as far as President Trump is concerned. Yet Brazil and India decide to work together. India decides to carry forward the BRICS tradition. And India hasn't backed away from any of the claims that the BRICS has made. India has not distanced itself from it. So I think these are issues which, even from a Trumpian perspective, are becoming somewhat difficult to absorb. I suspect that by now a lot of countries have come to understand what's behind the Trump rhetoric. I think if one looks at the way the tariffs are coming, there are tariffs which are being pulled out on a country-wide basis, and there are tariffs which are sectoral. And there's a third group of tariffs which could be blockwise. So in this blockwise group of tariffs, you might be having something which President Trump till now has only declared for the European Union, and now he's going to bring in the BRICS. There are sectoral tariffs, Section 232, for steel, aluminium, automobiles, a large number of other countries, other products, which are, it's not clear yet whether they would be imposed in addition to the countrywide tariffs or not. I think countries have by now realized that this tariff game on part of the United States is a series of disjointed, ad hoc, irrational policies which they will have to live and accept with. And they have to at the same time keep working on building other relationships which preserve their markets, which continue to give them market access and make them confident and secure over the fact that even if market access in the United States is becoming limited, they are not in the long term affected by that. I think the BRICS is clearly playing its cards in that respect, in that direction. So I think that's a very important lesson which the United States should now start picking up, that not all of its actions are going away just like that. I mean, there are countries which are beginning to become parts of coalitions, which are important, and perhaps President Trump has ended up doing what nobody could do to the BRICS for the last 15 years. He has started to get the BRICS united.
He has energized the bloc. But I think I would like to sort of dig on that a little bit deeper. First is that, why do you think Trump has given the BRICS the importance of a bloc, which he hasn't done, which he could have done for the SCO or any other grouping? That is one. The second, that how do you think the Rio Summit has sort of illustrated the growing divide between the global south, or the developing economies, as we would say, or middle powers, and the US-led global order? And with that in background, what do you think is the future of the BRICS? I know that it is hard to predict sometimes what exactly will happen, but there are a lot of actionable aspects of the BRICS, like as you mentioned, the Grain Bank or the New Development Bank. All of that provides avenue for issues of climate security, economic resilience, all of that. So in keeping that in mind, what would be the future of the BRICS in the current world order, which is rather disruptive?
I think, Devyani, the first thought that comes to my mind in this regard is that if you look at the composition of the BRICS were always a group of powerful economies in the world. So China, for example, the second largest one, India today, the fourth largest, followed closely by Brazil and Indonesia, which are around the 10th and 11th largest numbers. And then we have a group of other countries coming up in the BRICS ladder, which are prominent in their economic sizes, which are prominent in their control over major resources of the world, which for the United States is a very important issue. For example, the Middle Eastern countries, UAE and Saudi Arabia between themselves, Indonesia from Southeast Asia. And then, even a country like Iran, by itself a sizable presence. Now, let's consider the almost impossible scenario where all of these countries somehow converge to an agenda which may not be anti-American on purpose, but still turns out to be something which is strongly against the American interests. It's not something that is very palatable for the United States at this point in time. So obviously, he's getting anxious over such a possibility because American actions by themselves have impacted all these economies in manners which are not really very beneficial for any of them while being at the receiving end, whether it be India, whether it be China. I'm not even getting into Russia and Iran, but all other countries have been at the receiving end of American actions in a variety of ways. And I'm not just talking about trade and tariffs. There are many other things which have been happening around the world over the last 6 to 6.5 months, where the United States has been very unpredictable in its actions, voices, views and thoughts, and it's been moving between postures, vacillating in its tone, and this is not really sending out the signal that these countries would be comfortable continuing to engage with the United States. And somewhere, perhaps this is something which is also beginning to impact the American thinking, that is the Trump thinking, that look, if this is the way things go, and if the BRICS really get their act together, it might bring on the table implications which are difficult to handle, foremost among them being the perceived challenge to the American dollar. A huge amount of the American ability to geo-economically project power in today's world and influence other countries to act in a manner which is consistent with its interests depends upon the hegemony of the American dollar. And if that goes, and let's not forget the fact that today a number of the BRICS members are very advanced insofar as issuing their sovereign digital currencies are concerned. China has started experimenting it in a retail basis, so has India, and so has countries from the Middle East. So if we take all these factors, put them together into a box, start connecting the dots, the pattern that emerges is not a very comfortable proposition for the United States. But let me also put it this way, and moving on to the second question that you asked, that what does it mean for the BRICS in the future? Look, I think none of this is actually a very planned route for the BRICS. Had we not had a Trump 2.0, had we continued with the way, things were with the American administration during the Biden era, we perhaps would not have seen the BRICS becoming so, quote unquote, politically conspicuous as it has in the Rio Summit. It might have just confined itself to the other basic issues that it had, including, working on food security or maybe public health concerns. I mean, today even the BRICS realizes that insofar as the goal of the decarbonization across the world is concerned, the United States has totally backed out, and it has to fend for itself in some respect. I think that is where the BRICS, while not acting in a planned way, is still beginning to be brought together by a series of factors, none of which were planned by it, but all of which now seem to be acting in a manner which pushes them into some sort of galvanized action. Now, whether this will mean that the BRICS acquires a different character as a bloc down the line is not easy to predict at this point in time, but I have a feeling that in certain areas of economic management, the BRICS is indeed going to show much more united action. And those might, down the line, have much larger strategic implications for the world and the United States and the BRICS members themselves than what we can anticipate at this point in time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Palit. I think this was a very insightful conversation. We learned a lot about the BRICS, the US tariffs, what they would mean for the BRICS countries, and how the summit's changing over time and what to look forward to. So thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, and thank you for hosting me again.
Thank you. You were listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about our work, please visit us at isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates from our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.